When the rain starts late, everything that was hiding finds a way to lean toward the sound. It draws edges into sharper focus. The slick glare of streetlight on asphalt, the way a puddle holds a neon sign for one trembling second before it breaks. Tonight, I sat with a stack of messages and a kettle that never quite boiled, listening to a storm that refused to let the city go to sleep. I read through hundreds of submissions this week. 50 of them kept me awake. 50 nights when the rain made ordinary people small and the world around them larger, stranger, more dangerous in the quiet hours. I collect these as if they're pieces of a long, wet map. You can trace routes of fear through them. An empty beach, a back road, a motel corridor, a highway shoulder. The rain is the line that connects everyone. Each sender closed a message like a confession. These memories always come dressed in wet coats and the smell of cold concrete. Tonight, I begin with the small, sharp ones. The late dates, the odd strangers at the edge of town, the near misses that are almost too mundane to be terrifying until you realize how close they cut. 1. They sent this one with a photo of a beach alley blurred by rain. The message began, "My first date, a midnight walk after too much seafood." It read like something meant to be ordinary. They'd laughed about the rain at first, his jacket clutched against them, the ocean blackened surf like a soft machine. Then a shadow moved in the dunes, a shape that shouldn't have been there, a concrete block by the pathway, a man sitting with his knees tucked, staring at them. He got up when we passed. He was tall, and he smelled like the tide and engine oil. My date joked, tried to smooth it into small talk. The man walked a few steps behind us, and then broke the cadence. "You don't belong here alone." He said it like a question and like a command. My date's joking died. We picked up pace. The man began making a sound like he was counting the steps between us, the rain swallowing his voice and then letting it slip back loud enough to be a presence. We turned down a service lane toward the parking lot. The man followed us into the light of a single sodium lamp and then stopped as though he thought better of it. He put his hands into his pockets. Too deliberately, too slowly. When we lunged into the car, the driver's door slammed against the rain, and the engine folded us into motion. We drove away and watched the lamp swallow him back into the dark. I never told anyone I dated him again. They wrote it months later when the rain started again, like the weather drags memory up by the roots. He could have stepped forward, the submission said. He could have done something small that would have ended everything. 2. This one arrived as a short text. A man who claimed he nearly had his head cracked with a chunk of concrete. He was a midnight courier, his route a loop of alleys and loading docks, working for cash, numb with repetition. The rain that night was a fine spray that slicked the boxes and made his boots slide. He stopped at a back entrance where a teenager was huddled under an awning, smoking, his hoodie plastered to his skull with water. "Can you spare a cigarette?" the kid asked too plainly. The courier handed one over, saw the kid nod. Then the kid's friend appeared from the shadows and lunged with a slab of concrete, swinging for the head as if practice had taught him where to aim. The courier raised his arms. The rock hit the side of the doorframe. It split the wood instead of his skull. He smelled the rain inside his mouth and a new, metallic fear. The kids ran down the alley like animals frightened by an unseen light. He said he still dreams of the concrete in his hand and how ordinary the motion was, just a throw, a thing thrown in the dark. The message closed. "I've changed my route. I tell myself it was luck. Sometimes I still taste rain and iron when I wake." 3. A woman sent a clip of a cracked rearview mirror and wrote, "Pickup truck almost turned my night into something worse." She was coming home from a shift at an all-night diner. The highway was a wet ribbon with headlights smeared, every car pushing through the dim. A beat-up pickup pulled up alongside her and slowed to her speed, driver leaning out, offering a hand in the shape of a question. He said he was lost. He'd been watching the road, wanted to know the way to the next gas station. She told him, through the half-open window, that she was late, that she had kids at home, that she had no patience for strangers in the rain. He kept leaning in, too close, breath warm and smelling of cigarettes and oil. The truck nudged her bumper a few times like a toy. When she refused to stop, the driver reached across her car, opening the latch of the passenger side and trying the handle. She yanked the wheel hard. The truck swerved and then peeled off into the wet night. She reported it as an attempted robbery, maybe worse, and later found out from a neighbor that the same truck had been seen circling their street for weeks. When the rain comes, she said, people smell like things you don't want them to. She started varying her shifts. 4. This one was a message from someone who worked nights restocking shelves in a grocery store. He said he took the late bus because gas was expensive and the city buses moved like sleeping things under rain. One night, the bus pulled up late. The driver, a man who shouldn't have been driving, kept glancing at him in a way that felt personal. When the bus emptied to a handful of regulars, the driver parked under a broken street lamp and asked him for directions to a place that wasn't on the GPS. The store clerk said he felt naked with that kind of attention. He learned to watch people's hands. The driver started asking where the emptiest parking lots were, where the back doors stayed unlocked. He thought the driver was fishing for information. When the clerk left the bus, the driver followed, then quickened to match his steps with a clang in his voice that made the clerk's pulse twist. A van pulled into the lot, headlights like blunt knives. The clerk crossed the parking lot and pretended to take a call until the van sped off. He never saw it again, only the rain blotting the license plate into an unreadable smear. He wrote, "Something in the rain makes them bold. It makes me second-guess every exit." He quit taking the late bus. 5. This one came as a voicemail. A woman, voice low, saying she almost left the bar with a guy who later turned up at the bus stop where she waited. She'd agreed to walk him to a cab, and he insisted on making it a few blocks together. The rain had blurred the city into warm, oily reflections. Under the umbrella, his laugh filled the space between them. When he stopped talking and turned silent, she noticed he was walking too slowly, matching her steps like a metronome. He kept saying, "You're brave. You shouldn't be out alone." She said the hair on her arms lifted in the rain. At the bus stop later, he appeared again from a different street corner, not in the cab she assumed he'd take. She crossed the street, pretending to check a message. He followed. She told herself she'd call a friend and said, "Hey, I'm safe," as if the phone tethered her to the world. He asked which apartment block she lived in, and something in his eyes slid into a possessive shape. A stranger asked if he could walk her the last block, an old man who smelled of cheap cologne and menthol. And the stranger agreed, kept his gaze on the streetlight, never on her, until they reached the door. She said the man at the bus stop left when she turned her key and didn't look back. The rain washed everything smooth. The old man didn't want thanks. "I only told him to be careful," she reported. "He just looked at me like he'd done it 100 times. 6. This came as a clip of sneaker soles slapping through a puddle. It was a near miss on a street where the city's homeless shelters clustered, where the wet night flattened people into small shapes under tarps. A woman was walking home from a late shift at a bookstore. She took the familiar route that cut through an alley with cheap fluorescent lights. A man stepped out from behind a dumpster, hands in his pockets. At first she thought he was asking for change. He didn't. He walked close enough that his umbrella brushed hers. He said, "You're going the wrong way." She kept walking. He matched her steps. He moved like a mirror, matching pace, matching the way she tucked her scarf closer. When she finally ran, something in the sound of her own breath made him startle and then laugh. He called after her, a soft, surprised sound, and then turned away into the rain. She wrote it that night, shaky with adrenaline, and the message closed with one sentence. It was small. It should have been small. But when you feel someone breathing behind you in a rain-slick alley, you understand how fast almost can become gone. If you like these storm night stories, subscribe for more, but stay with me for the worst. Rain has a way of separating the ordinary from the dangerous. It makes alleys into arteries and headlights into statements. The next batch of submissions came from people who found themselves not just looked at, but stranded. Engine trouble on the shoulder while the rain typed nonsense across the windshield, the slow realization that help might not be rescue, that the night has room for predators who use breakdowns like invitation cards. 7. A man wrote, "I learned to fear the HOV exit." He was driving a company car home after a training night. The freeway had become an actual river, every lane a band of reflected light. His engine hiccuped and went quiet, as if someone had unplugged the world. He eased to the shoulder and coasted until the car died in a soft, defeated way. He tried to call for roadside assistance, but the call dropped. No signal in that stretch. He crouched under the hood in the rain because he thought being visible in the weather might be safer. A truck pulled up behind him, older model with a faded logo. The driver leaned out the window and offered to tow him to a nearby garage. The man read the offer like a question hanging in the steam of the radiator. He agreed. The driver directed him to a secluded turnoff, as if the garage was down a path he knew too well. The truck engine idled too loud. When they reached the side road, the driver killed the lights and said, "We'll just get you out of here." The man felt the wind lift his hair, and then the truck door snapped open as if someone had decided they owned his evening. He said he told a small, ridiculous lie, that a friend was on the way, that a partner would be calling in 10 minutes. The driver frowned and gestured like a man who doesn't like being lied to. An oncoming car's headlights revealed the driver's face for a fraction, a man's face with a scarred smile. The plan dissolved when a second truck rolled up and someone shouted. The driver swore, slamming the first truck into gear and backing away with a muttered threat. The two trucks chugged off into the rain. The man sat in the cold and waited for a tow that eventually came from the highway patrol. He ended the message, "If you roll your window a crack and say you have someone on the way, it might buy you a minute." 8. A woman sent me a voice note with the sound of rain and the rustle of an old coat. She was a college student driving late to a weekend job, a small coin purse of cash and textbooks in the back seat. Her transmission began to smell wrong and then stopped responding on a lonely 2-lane road where the trees leaned like a warning. She pulled over and put on the hazard lights. Rain beat the windshield, turning every shadow into a potential face. A beat-up sedan pulled over behind her. A man with a flash in his eyes got out and offered to help, starting with simple language. "I've changed a tire for people before." She accepted because panic is a battery that runs out fast. He worked with practiced hands and an easy smile. When she thanked him and offered cash, he refused, then reached into his jacket and touched her arm in a way that didn't feel like gratitude. His fingers lingered long enough that the word "wrong" assembled itself in her chest. She told me she felt stupid afterward, because the man was clean and his offerings had the cadence of a neighbor. But when another car pulled up, the man hurried to his car and sped off before she could get a license plate. She wrote, "It's a small thing to say no to help, but it's also a small thing to be refused when you're alone and the rain is heavy." 9. This one arrived as a type story about a driver who learned that the highway shoulder can be a theater. His story read like a list of small failures. Tire pressure ignored, a long stretch without cell service. But what made his night dangerous was the way the cars that stopped around him were not all rescuers. The first vehicle offered a blanket and a thermos. The second vehicle circled too slowly, lights off, and then a man in the back seat tapped on his window with a glinting object. The highway's sound condensed into rain and distant tires. Everything else collapsed. He said a trucker pulled over farther down and saw what was happening. The trucker stayed lodged between the stranger's car and theirs, radioed in for help, and kept his lights blazing until the patrol came. He never saw the stranger again. He sent me a photo of the trucker's weathered knuckles, smeared grease like a badge. The message was simple. Not all strangers will make the night worse. Some will throw themselves at it until it stops. 10. Someone reported a near abduction at a rest stop. She had stopped to use the restroom and to stretch, her hair drenched and her jacket clinging like a second skin. A man in a work vest followed her from the convenience store, asking if she wanted a ride to the next town. She said no. He kept walking beside her and then gripped her wrist when she tried to leave. She pulled away, shredding a sleeve. The man backed off when the store clerk shouted, and then the woman's phone rang precisely on cue, a call from an unknown number that she used as a pretext to walk away talking loudly about police. She finished the message with a kind of breathless clarity. Your voice can be a tool. Say things out loud. Invent friends. Let the rain cover you while your mouth keeps noise. She advised anyone alone to keep their eyes scanning places where headlights could appear and to memorize the names of every store in a rest stop, like a litany. 11. A courier sent me a photo of a fogged mirror and a note. Truck stop, 2 a.m., learner's permit and a threat. He was guiding a delivery and had to pull into a deserted truck stop when the GPS said to. The rain had turned the lot slick and blotted the painted lines. He noticed a van parked well away from the pumps with its door cracked. A man stepped out with a grip on a box, walked toward him with the slow certainty of someone who had thought it through and rehearsed it. The courier kept the door locked, kept his hand on the gear shift, and when the man struck the window with the flat of his hand, he revved the engine carelessly enough to suggest his car would not be an easy prize. The van sped away when a trucker honked, a high, abrasive warning that rolled through the rain. The courier left the truck stop with a lingering sense of being watched. He wrote that he learned to change his parking habits and to keep doors locked, even when he thought he trusted the lot. 12. A late-night rideshare driver told me about picking up a man at a strange hour who wanted to be taken out of town. The rain had turned the city into a washed postcard, and the passenger smelled of expensive cologne and the tightness of someone who measures generosity like an experiment. Midway down the highway, the passenger asked to stop at a rest area and then left the car with a bag. The driver, after a pause, followed him out in the rain and found him standing at the edge of the woods, whispering on a phone and looking back like someone keeping an account. The passenger returned and handed the driver a folded bill and said nothing about the phone call. Later that night, the driver passed the rest area again and saw the passenger sitting in his car with other men, faces hidden under hats, lights low. Their voices rose and fell like lines in a code the driver could not translate. He wrote, I called the company and said I felt foolish. They told me to keep my route simple. I quit 2 weeks later. 13. A student on a road trip reported a highway phantom. They took a detour in the rain to avoid a storm-blocked interstate, and the bypass road narrowed into a place where GPS frayed and satellite maps were just suggestions. Their car began to cough and then refused to move. 2 vehicles pulled up, one offered a tow, the other circled slowly. The students argued about whether to accept the tow. They argued until the tow truck used language that made them uncomfortable. Offers of a motel nearby, friends with rooms, private garages. One of the students texted home an address, a nonsense string, just to make it look like he had somewhere to go. The tow truck driver got impatient and started making small demands, a number, a name, a place. The students decided to walk the road to a farmhouse that appeared in the black and rain like a reluctant lighthouse. The farmer's dog barked them into a shed and made them cups of coffee. The tow truck left when men in work jackets arrived in a different vehicle. Lights off. The students didn't sleep that night. They sent me a photo of their rubber soles and the words, "If the road gives you rubbish, do not accept open offers." 14. A nurse who moonlighted as a concierge wrote to me about breaking down on a rainy service road outside the city and being rescued by an older veteran in a pickup that smelled of camphor and leather. He didn't ask for payment. He kept the engine on and the heater low. While he worked on her battery, he told stories about nights in foreign lands when rain had been thicker than this, and how you learned to read people the way you read weather, by listening to what they didn't say. She wrote that while they talked, a car came down the road slowly and then spun its lights off, like a pair of eyes going dark. The veteran watched it pass without moving. When the car reappeared minutes later, its occupants weren't alone. A woman leaned out of the passenger window like a question, and the car slowed, as if reading the veteran's truck like a threshold. The veteran called in a mechanic alert and told her to get into his cab, to lock the doors and breathe. The creeping car passed again and then stuttered away. The veteran wouldn't say why he'd done what he did, only shrugged like a man who'd chosen a side once and kept choosing it. She sent his words like relics. "Some nights you should be unkind on purpose," he told her. "The rain's a good coat for that. We stop and hold our breaths at the shoulder of the highway. The rain keeps talking on the roof of the world. These stories show how close danger sits, when your car light dies and your heart races, when strangers lean toward your window like offers with strings attached. But danger isn't always a stranger with a truck. Sometimes it's a hotel corridor that feels like a throat." The stories that follow dug into places with fluorescent hums and keys that jangle like small, territorial bells. Motel rooms are domestic spaces stretched thin. They keep blankets and ghosts, and sometimes the remnants of whatever argument unfolded before you checked in. 15. A woman wrote that she checked into a small chain hotel soaked from a thunderstorm that seemed to concentrate on the town alone. The lobby smelled like fabric softener and damp carpet. At 2 a.m., she woke to the sound of someone in the hall dragging footsteps that paused outside her door and then moved away. She told herself it was another guest, a cleaning cart, the old pipes. She pressed her ear to the door and listened. No voices, no urgent things, just the rain knitting the world back together. She slid a chair against the door and fell asleep. But dreams are thin on nights like that. The next day, she learned that another guest had reported a man wandering the corridors late, asking for rooms, and then slipping into doors without keys. Security footage was vague, a shadow that moved without its own feet. The hotel staff said they'd had complaints, then leaned into the same script most businesses use when something bad looks like a rumor. She never saw him enter her room, but she felt watched when the overhead light buzzed, like someone listening through the walls. She sent me a photo of the door latch and wrote, "I keep thinking I imagined it, but I keep hearing the drag of feet when it rains." 16. A late traveller on business said he woke to a tapping, 3 soft knocks nearly inaudible under the storm. He looked out through the peephole and saw nothing but a wet corridor and a laundry cart. The door had a thin slit of light beneath it. The knocking came again, and this time he saw fingers curled against the frame, as if someone was testing the idea of entrance. He told me he braced for the worst and turned the deadbolt. The knocking faded. In the morning, housekeeping apologized for a drunk guest in the next wing. He reported that the sound of rain makes you lean toward the doorway, as if the world invited you to step outside and then punished you for it. 17. A couple wrote about a phone call in the middle of a storm. The front desk called their room complaining about noise. They were on the phone, hushed, their voice pulled into the corded receiver. The man answering the call said he could hear them breathing through the line. He asked them to turn down the TV. They obliged. When they left for breakfast, they found a note slid under the door, an invitation written in a handwriting that kept beginning and stopping. The front desk denied writing it. They left early and never returned. The rain met them at the curb like a question. 18. A hostel worker shared a story of a guest who reported someone sleeping in his bed at night and disappearing when the staff checked the camera. The guest swore he had woken to a weight, to the smell of wet wool, and had felt a breath at his shoulder. The footage showed an empty room. The entry log showed no entry. The guest packed and left at dawn. He told the worker that he had always been practical and skeptical, but the rain that night had turned practicality into a brittle thing, not enough to stop whatever crept. 19. Another submission came from a woman who checked into a motel alone and later walked into the bathroom to find the shower head dripping, though she'd turned it off. The water ran cold and slow, as if pleading. She told me she left a towel on the bed and found it folded the next morning the way housekeeping doesn't fold, a precise, careful shape like a hand that has practiced gentleness. She said she didn't know what she feared more, someone with time to fold a towel or something that could learn to mimic human kindness. 20. This one was shorter, a note about waking to a voice whispering through the heating vents. The woman wrote, "It said my name." The staff blamed pipes. She left, the rain still wiping the room clean, and wondered whether pipes could remember names. I keep a folder labeled Hotel Corridors on nights like this. The rain seems to thread itself through doors and into memory, and hotels are thin skins between the familiar and the unknown. After a wet night with fluorescent hums and suspicious knocks, people are less likely to sleep. They become awake with the small, sharp vigilance of those who know the night has teeth. 2 nights later, the submissions shifted again. The rain didn't stop. It moved from shrinking the world to stretching it thin, shifts and stops, a rhythm that makes you believe you can outpace danger, and then teaches you can't. The next stories turned inward. Workplace nights where fluorescent lights make long shadows, a front desk worker hearing the wrong kind of knock, a cashier watched by someone too patient. 21. A gas station attendant wrote that he had learned to keep the register under lock when it rained. Customers come in with wet coats and thin patience. One night, a man sauntered in and started chatting like he wanted small talk. The attendant said the man's eyes kept flicking to the cash drawer and then to the back door, like he was trying to map the room. The man asked about the back rooms, asked where deliveries came in. Then he asked if the clerk worked nights alone. The attendant said he lied. A partner was coming in 5 minutes, he said, just to be safe. The man left with no purchases, but the attendant could feel the inventory of the story shift from casual to planned. Later, the man returned with 2 others, and then banged the door and demanded money. The attendant hid behind a display and thumbed his phone with trembling thumbs. The thieves left when an alarm thought better of itself, and the store's old wooden front protested. He keeps a baseball bat under the counter now, and a memory of rain pounding the glass like it was trying to join the robbery. 22. A janitor in an office building described the slow creep of a man who checked the floors each night while the lights hummed and the rain made glass into grey mirrors. The janitor said he often saw the man reading plaques and muttering under his breath, always when he thought no one watched. One night, the man cornered a young intern, trying to force small talk that bent into something sharp. The janitor stepped out with a mop as if he were offering the world a distraction. The intern bolted. The man left when the janitor's footsteps sounded nearer. "Some people practice," the janitor wrote, "and when practice becomes patience, they stop being harmless." 23. A night nurse wrote about the thinness of hospital corridors during storms. Shifts compress into breaths. She told of a patient who clutched at the nurse's hand during a blackout, eyes wild with something that wasn't just pain. The man spoke of voices and footsteps in rooms that were supposed to be empty. They checked cameras. Nothing. She left that night thinking maybe the building held memory, that the rain made the edges of the living thin enough for the other things to lean through. She added, almost apologetically, "I don't want to offer ghosts as an answer, but we ran out of better ones." 24. A bartender in a hotel lobby told how a group of late-arriving guests insisted on a room even when the hotel claimed it was full. They were polite but insistent, umbrellas dripping onto the lobby rug. The bartender said he smelled alcohol and regret and a kind of quiet that tastes like rehearsed trouble. He gave them a room, and later found they'd left off a wet shoe on the landing. He followed the stairwell's drip to an empty corridor and a room with the door slightly ajar. Inside, the room had been used as if a sudden meeting had ended. Glasses on the nightstand, chairs pushed back, a smell that suggested an argument. He locked the room and never found out what had been argued over. He kept the shoe in lost and found like an unreadable clue. 25. A night desk clerk wrote, "A call came in complaining of noise from a room where no guest had checked in." He put the call on hold and walked the corridor. The rain stitched itself along the windows and nothing moved but the HVAC in a steady sigh. He said he opened doors and found only towels and empty beds. Back at the desk, the caller thanked him and hung up. A few hours later, the clerk checked the log and found a line item. Guest cancelled at 3:14 a.m. No show. The clerk closed the log and stared at the rain on the glass, like a thing that knew other people's plans. Workplaces after midnight take on a different temperature with rain. It seems to sharpen intent, to focus hands into the small tools of predation. Yet, as often as houses of business become traps, people also become guardians, truckers who stay, veterans who offer cover, strangers who insist on being unprofitable in order to be kind. The rain didn't let up as the night grew older. Submissions piled into something heavier, darker, stalkings and attempts that were not accidental but planned. The writers worried that their stories would look small on paper. They were not small. They were the chronological records of people who had brushed against plans their lives had not included. 26. A woman sent a trembling account of an app date gone wrong. She'd met someone who laughed easily, who shared music links and sent pictures of his dog. The rain that night had been a curtain. They met under a cafe awning and decided to walk. He suggested a shortcut through an underpass that smelled like wet metal and old soda. Halfway through he stopped, turned toward her, and his tone shifted. He began asking about where she kept spare keys, about when she expected to be alone. She made excuses, said she had to be somewhere. He coaxed as if he were inviting her to a script he had written, and by asking the lines he hoped she'd deliver, hoped she'd agree. She left the underpass mid-sentence, saying she had to call a friend. He followed for a block before the reflection in a shop window showed her that he had slowed and then turned. She took a taxi home and slept with the door chain on for a week. The message closed with the line, "Dating apps are small, bright places where some people practice permission." 27. A teen wrote about being followed home from a laundromat. The rain made the streetlights halo into circles. She took the long way because it was safer during the day. At night, no route guarantees safety. She felt a car behind her, then another, then the silence of them when they paused at the same light as she did. She tried to time her steps so the car would pass, but the driver of the second car slowed and matched her pace like they had planned it. She ducked into a convenience store and watched through the fogged glass as the cars queued and then moved off. She wrote that she learned to always carry a coin for the payphone because sometimes the modern tricks fail. 28. A late-shift security guard reported a man who watched employees leave and then learned their schedules. The man took to appearing wherever someone left alone, smiling in the rain with an umbrella that made him oddly formal. When he eventually tried to follow one woman from the back door, the guard stepped out and spoke to him with a directness that made the man leave. The guard reported the incident internally and felt their complaint roll into a bureaucratic, slow drip. The man wasn't arrested. He left town for a while and then seemed to return like weather that goes on holiday and then comes back worse. 29. A woman told a story of a neighbor who kept turning up at different lights of the block, always one step behind, offering to walk her dog or bring trash inside. At first, it seemed considerate. Then he kept appearing on nights she had guests, and then on nights she didn't, learning her rhythms until she felt like a clock. She started leaving pairs of shoes by the door to make it look like someone else was home. She slept with a baseball bat on her nightstand for months. When she moved, the man stood across the street in the rain and watched the moving truck like a man learning departure rituals. She wrote to say she finally called the police and filed an order. It bought her decades of sleep. 30. A doctor on a residency recalled a stalker who started with notes slipped under his apartment door and escalated to pacing the front sidewalk in the rain, making sure he saw the doctor leave and return. The doctor changed his routes, moved his evening running to a treadmill. When he confronted the person, he found a neighbor who smiled like it was the natural extension of a kindness. The neighbor denied everything when confronted. The doctor left the building for a month, and when he returned, the neighbor was gone. He sent me the rain-smudged note he'd found months earlier. You should be careful where you sleep. There is a small arithmetic that builds in these pages. A late shift becomes a lonely shift becomes a pattern becomes a plan. Rain gives every pause an accent and every step a witness. The short stories here are not always gory or dramatic, but they accumulate into a geography of risk that becomes unmistakable. By the time the stack of messages hit the cult and ritual cluster, those stories that came from outside the city's wet glow, from the sparse, trembling outskirts, the rain had done something else. It blurred distance. Rain sounds the same, whether it hits freeway concrete or a dirt road out past the last blue streetlight. People wrote from cabins and campsites where the rain made the trees slick and the dirt a reflective black. These were the notes that made my chest tighten because they spoke of groups and rehearsed patterns and a scale that isn't contained by a car door or a motel corridor. I won't use lurid detail, I won't parade victims like curiosities. These next accounts came in small bundles, reports and rumors, things people had seen on a rainy night and could not reconcile with daylight. I read them on the same night the sky wouldn't let go. 31. A woman wrote from a county that smells faintly of pine when it rains. She and a friend had decided to go camping despite the weather, both tired of routines. They pitched a tent under drooping branches and lay awake, listening to the rain. Late, they heard voices chanting low and rhythmic, like someone hitting a distant drum with the cadence of intention. One of them whispered to the other that she should call someone. The rain made phone service thin. They zipped themselves into the tent and watched salt water bead on the outer fabric like small hourglasses. In the morning, they found a ring of stones in the clearing, damp as if someone had used them hours before. The grass inside the circle pressed like someone had kneaded it. They reported the ring to the sheriff, who called it a kid's prank and left. They drove back home without panicking, but with an unease that settled like silt. The woman said that later she found a small talisman on the car seat. No one would own up to it, and she kept it in a drawer because throwing it away felt like the wrong kind of ceremony. 32. A man who lived near a forgotten estate told a story that began with a late-night drive and a wrong turn. The rain had softened the turnout and stretched the dark. He pulled to the side to check the map and saw lights from the estate like a constellation. People had been talking about the place, rumors of meetings and signs posted against trespassing, but curiosity is a small, unshakable thing. He walked the driveway and heard chanting behind hedges. He hid in the rain, listening, until the chanting turned into something that sounded like names being read. He didn't see faces, only the glow of a fire and hands raised. He left and drove away, and later the sheriff's department released a short, careful statement about a raid that had been inconclusive. The man wrote in the submission that the police result felt like a lid dropped on a pot that had already boiled over. He kept the radio tuned to a talk station for the whole drive home, the names still rolling like a list you can't close. The sheriff's bulletin later was careful and clinical. People called it inconclusive, and the filing left a blank where certainty should be. Indefinido, the man wrote, and the rain kept falling on the estate hedges like nothing had changed. He slipped the wipers on slow and drove until the asphalt blurred into the city's reflection pools, carrying the scent of pine and something else that didn't wash away. 33. Another caller said they stumbled onto a clearing where sticks had been set upright in a geometry that wasn't accidental. They'd gone out to photograph a lightning strike and parked on a muddy lane because the sky had peeled open over the tree line. Under the rain, the sticks made a pattern that looked like a language. They left footprints that the rain tried to smooth, and in their rear view, a figure on the far edge of the clearing who didn't move like someone who was lost, but like someone who was keeping watch. They reported it to a county line dispatcher and were told to be careful, to make a note in case someone else called. No arrests were announced. The files sat in liminal folders. The writer closed the message saying the rain that night had made their shoes heavy with guilt and the memory of being watched heavier still. 34. A neighbor claimed to have driven past a farmhouse and seen dozens of cars parked in the dark like a congregation. The taillights lined the road like slow, blinking candles. There was a low sound, not quite song, not quite speaking, something practiced. They said they thought of calling it in, then thought of the 3 times the sheriff came out and said there was nothing to substantiate. Days later, reporters wrote of a private gathering, and the area slipped back into its daily rain. The neighbor wrote that sometimes the most dangerous thing is the idea that nothing happened because people didn't look hard enough. 35. A woman sent a short note about a recruitment meeting she had attended as a young adult. She used the word recruitment, then hesitated in the message and wrote indefinido, what they called it. The rain had hammered the roof of the hall, and everyone was wet and eager. She said they fed them bread, and said words about belonging and purpose until hands were raised and the line between ritual and performance thinned. She left before anything worse happened, but the memory of the circle, wet shoes on the floorboards, the slow syncopation of clapping, stayed with her. She used the phrase, "We drunk the small, warm lies," and then sent the message with the caution of someone who had seen how a story can gather momentum in the dark. 36. One submission came from someone whose brother had been taken, according to the writer, by people who promised a cure for an addiction. They'd driven through rain-slicked roads to an address that on paper looked like a retreat. The man who called himself Director met them at the gate with a smile. He promised rehabilitation in the kind of sentences that were tidy and full of paperwork. Days later, the brother disappeared from the rent-controlled room he'd shared. The family reported it. Detectives opened a file. The company behind the retreat issued a statement that denied wrongdoing and said it had no record of the man on its roster. Indefinido remained boxed into police reports and quiet files. The writer kept a photograph of the gate with raindrops on the camera lens. 37. A caller reported a raid from months earlier that had been small in the headlines, but huge in memory. On a rainy night, mobile units arrived, and neighbors watched with flashlights, marshaled by the press. People in protective gear carried things away. There were rumors then, and for years afterward, about buried places and ritual paraphernalia. The official statements called the raid investigative and slow to prosecute. Some people who'd reported later said they felt gaslit by the process. The writer added, with the care of someone who'd been in the room, "I don't know who was tried, or even if charges stuck. My memory is the rain, and the police tape against that rain like a seam." The submission ended with the plea that victims' names be remembered without spectacle, and I read it as if the wind outside might carry those names away. Rain thins the distance between real-world harm and the uncanny. It turns dirt roads into curtains and neighborhoods into a chorus of tapped messages. I keep the cult stories short and grave in my folder. They weigh more than the others and make the room feel colder. When the rain steadies into a long, patient tapping, the messages change tone, back toward the domestic, the intimate, the near miss that breathes like a living thing. 38. A woman wrote about a teenage memory she never told anyone until the rain this year folded time onto her and made it possible. She'd been 10 and walked home from a sleepover under a sky that opened up like a faucet. A van slowed beside them. The man inside smiled too hard and asked if they wanted to get in out of the rain. They had run. One friend had tripped in the mud, and the man had reached for her, hand hovering like an offering, then pulled back when a neighbor shouted. They scrambled home muddy and shaking. She had sealed that memory like a jar and labeled it with excuses. When she sent the note, she wrote, "I thought it was just one of those things children are told to forget, until you realize forgetting is how some people keep going." 39. Another submission came from a parent who'd followed their gut on a rainy night and saved a child. Their daughter had been texting with someone she'd met online and agreed to meet at a fast food parking lot. The parent had the nagging sense that something was wrong and drove out in the rain, pretending they were going to the pharmacy. They watched from their car as a man asked the girl about where she lived, how old she was, what her parents did. The parent flashed headlights like a hand, and the man left, cursing into rain that stole his words. They called the police, and the girl's phone later contained messages that were ambiguous and manipulative. The parent wrote that the rain had felt like a shield and a broadcast at once. It hid them in their car, while it announced their presence to someone about to make a dangerous assumption. 40. A teenager shared a sliver of a night when a stranger at a laundromat patted her shoulder and said, "Do you need a ride?" She told him she was meeting her father. He smiled like he knew the line of a family. She lied about her father's name and made the man wait as she pretended to call, fingers trembling, voice on the phone that she had cued into a friend who answered and pretended to be with her. The man left when the fake friend promised to come pick her up. She wrote that she learned the usefulness of invented company and the weight of practicing a voice that belongs to someone else. 41. A college student on a rainy night wrote that a dating app meet had ended with her feeling pocketed and watched. The man had requested they walk a narrow path to his car. Under a willow tree, he had moved closer under the pretense of sharing an umbrella. He kept telling her how brave she was to walk alone in the storm. His compliments slid into questions about her home and routine. She dialed a wrong number on purpose and put the phone on loudspeaker, speaking a line she had rehearsed about a roommate coming by. He stepped back and then left. She said she'd saved his profile, reported him, and later found other complaints, reports that were vague and left unresolved. She added, "In the rain, some people practice manners like rehearsed lines for a play no one else buys tickets to." 42. A parent wrote of a night when their child almost boarded the wrong car during a school trip because the rain had reduced every license plate to a blur. The child had climbed into a vehicle that looked similar to the ride they'd arranged. The driver reached for the child's backpack before the teacher caught sight and shouted. The driver drove off, lights vanishing into the wet. The family reported it, and the bus company tightened protocols. The writer closed the email with a line that felt like both confession and advice. "We learned to wear bright hats on rainy days." 43. A woman recounted leaving a bar under heavy rain and almost getting into a stranger's car because she thought it was her ride. The man in the driver's seat offered to drive her to a cab stand. She opened the door until a friend grabbed her sleeve and said, "That's not your ride." The man cursed and peeled away, but not before making a small, deliberate circling motion with his finger near his neck. The woman used the message to warn others about trust earned in a drizzle. Sometimes it can be practice for harm. 44. A short note said, My kid walked in the rain and didn't come home for 2 minutes. 2 minutes felt like an hour. The parent explained that almost abductions don't always include struggle. Sometimes they're about opportunities and timing, and the rain makes that timing slippery. They installed a doorbell camera and an app that pinged them when the child's phone moved. They wrote that the rain had been the thing that made the world soft enough for a man to reach without being seen, and their watchfulness for those 2 minutes became a ritual they never stopped. We move now into a different kind of dark, those nights where the possibility of something unexplainable sits beside the familiarity of human threat. The senders here had felt in the rain the brush of a presence that didn't belong to any living neighbor. 45. A night porter wrote about sheets that moved on their own in a room that had been left undisturbed. They were towels, he said at first, then a robe, then the top sheet of a bed lifting like breath from someone who had just inhaled. He checked the video and saw the corner of a blanket rise and fall, as if caught by some small private wind. The footage had no drafts, no cracked windows. He cleaned the rooms longer after that and left a small nightlight in the corridor because the guests had begun to mention drafts that weren't there. The rain on the window that night had been a steady percussion, and he wondered if the building had learned the rhythm and answered it. 46. A writer sent a voicemail of a night in a seaside inn where the mirror fogged in a pattern of letters, short, partial names that appeared across glass as if someone had spelled out a word and then smudged it. They wiped the mirror, and the letters had been patient enough to reappear. The innkeeper shrugged and said, "Old houses remember the people who stay." The sender left soon after, but carried a photo of a handprint that looked like it had been leaned against the panes from the outside. They closed with the line, "Rain makes the glass thin, and thin glass remembers thumbprints." 47. A junior paramedic told of a call when a house showed footprints on the carpet leading to a child's room and then stopping at the edge. No handprints, no marks on the bed, just the pattern of steps. They searched for a rational cause, found none. The family swore they had locked every door. The paramedic left thinking of old shoes tracked inside by repair work or a child sleepwalking. That night, in the ambulance, the rain smacked the windshield in steady fingers, and he thought of footsteps that did not match anybody he knew. 48. A woman reported seeing a figure at the edge of a park, an umbrella but no person showing under it. She watched as the umbrella rocked gently and then slid down the hill toward the pond and disappeared into a place where no path went. She told her sister, and they laughed at the image until the sister confessed she had seen the same umbrella months earlier from a different angle. They agreed not to say anything further. When it rains now, they check the bushes and then shrug as if they are both part of a club that keeps secrets to itself. 49. A man who worked nights in an old theatre said he found a single wet shoe on the stage after a storm. No one had reported it lost. The shoe was small, like a child's, laced and rigid with water. He left it on the wing, and the next night it had been moved center stage, facing the empty seats as if someone had set a scene. He tried to decide whether someone was playing a trick or whether the building had shifted the shoe like a caretaker with a ghostly sense of humor. He left the shoe on the stage for a week, and on the last night he worked there, it was gone. He told me he felt foolish and afraid in equal measures and kept the memory like a small, wet stone. 50. One last submission. Small as a match struck in all that dark. It was a one-line message sent at 3:13 a.m. on a rainy night. I woke to the rain hitting my window, and there was a silhouette pressed to the glass that looked like me. No explanation followed. The sender had turned on the light, and the silhouette was gone. They checked the porch and the yard and found only the rain and the wet tracks of a raccoon. They sent that single line, and then a second, "I still don't open the curtains when it's raining." Rain ties these notes together like a thread through a soaked quilt. It hides fingerprints and makes footprints into soft suggestions. It is, in many of these accounts, a collaborator, erasing license plates, amplifying voices, giving cover to people who have practiced mischief and to others who practice rescue. As I fold these messages back into their folders, I feel the rain on my windows, as if the city is replaying everything I've read. There's a small mercy threaded through many of these pages. Someone who did the right, difficult thing at the right time. Truckers who block lanes, strangers who call the police, old men who walk silent blocks with a purpose. For every story that leans toward calculation, there's one that ends with an act of unromantic courage. The rain shows both how easily we can be small under the sky and how we can sometimes keep someone from being smaller still. Before I close tonight's folder, I want to say this. If these storm night stories kept you awake, you're in the company of a long line of listeners who have learned vigilance the same way others have learned to tie shoes, by repeating the motion until it becomes second nature. Tell someone when your gut speaks. Let a friend stay on the line with you when a route worries you. And if you have a storm night memory of your own, don't keep it bottled. We listen. When the rain finally thins to a hush and the world seems in the mood to forgive itself for the night's business, I put the kettle on and read one last message. It's not long, 3 lines that arrived at dawn. We moved my mother to a small apartment after she started hearing things. The rain made the walls thin. One night she said, "Someone's here." I opened the window, and it was only the rain and the silhouette of a tree. She slept and I slept, and the house watched the rain and kept its silence. The writer's final line was a whisper against thunder. Some nights the scariest thing is how quickly the world can make us believe the rain carries answers. Tonight we began with small, sharp things, the dates, the near misses, and walked a long, wet arc through roads and motels, through work and cults, through the strange and the unexplainable. Rain was the constant, the accomplice, the witness. It collected the stories and kept them for me like pebbles in a pocket. If this kept you awake, hit like, and tell us your rainy night story below.